It's the SNL Hall of Fame podcast with your host, Jamie Dew, Chief Librarian Thomas Senna, and featuring Matt Ardill. And now, curator of the hall, Jamie Dew.
Hey, it's JD here, and I want to thank Doug DeNance for another lovely introduction. Welcome to the SNL Hall of Fame podcast. As I mentioned off the top, I am your host, JD. I am joined by Matthew Ardill in the trivia corner, and of course, our chief librarian, Thomas Senna, will handle the conversation with John Schneider today. So that's really exciting. But who are we going to cover? Well, before that, the SNL Hall of Fame podcast is a weekly affair where each episode we take a deep dive into the career of a former cast member, host, musical guest, or writer, and add them to the ballot for your consideration. Once the nominees have been announced, we turn to you, the listener, to vote for the most deserving and help determine who will be enshrined for perpetuity in the hall. And that's how we play the game. It's just that simple. May the 6th is the date you're going to want to circle on your calendar. That is when voting opens in the SNL Hall of Fame, and we have one hell of a ballot. There are some stakes here, as there are people that are on their 5th ballot that if they don't make it in, they will be removed from the ballot. And that is as high stakes as it really gets here on the SNL Hall of Fame, except for that time that we had lava on the floor. You bet your ass people wiped their feet then. Let's go to our friend Matt Ardill. Matthew, my friend.
How you doing, JD?
I'm great. Thanks for asking. How about you?
I'm good. I'm great as well. Yeah. I'm really excited. I love Will Forte on so many levels. I can't wait to share.
Well, learn me up.
Okay. Well, Will Forte, 5'9", born June 17th, 1970. He has 132 acting credits, 26 writing credits, 20 soundtrack credits, and 5 producer credits. He was born in Alameda County, California, and attended the University of California. He was a member, and this shocked me. He was a member of the varsity football team, varsity swim team, and so he was a jock. That's not what I would have expected.
Me neither.
But he
I would have
earned
pictured theater nerd.
Yeah, exactly. I would have imagined that as well. But I mean, that's just, that's, I guess, us not seeing past the stereotype. But he went on to earn a history degree.
It's a valuable lesson you just taught us, Matthew.
Yeah, it's just because somebody plays sports doesn't mean they don't have the love of theater in them.
That's right.
But yeah, so
thank you for that.
Yeah, not a problem. But yeah, got a degree in history from UCLA. And then he realized his true love was comedy, so he joined the Groundlings. He also tutored Faye Dunaway's 12-year-old son in mathematics while he was in high school.
Yeah.
Which is like, that's just a weird, this is the weird connections you get living in California.
Yeah, I suppose so. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's just, I don't know. I feel like living in Canada, we don't get those wacky connections. But at a young age, he went to see Tony Orlando, and Tony brought him and his friend up on the stage, and he encouraged them to follow their passions. So much so, he wrote him and Tony a nice letter many years later.
What a class act.
Yeah. And he, in fact, is a class act in multiple ways. He is also a class act video game player. He is the 36th highest scorer in the world in Donkey Kong.
Whoa.
Yeah, he watched that Fistful of Quarters documentary and is like, I can do that, and is now registered on Twin Galaxies as number 36 in the world.
That's brilliant. That movie also very, very good.
Yes, and it's not to go on a tangent. You watch that Fistful of Quarters, that the villain in that show is a total nut bar. You can go down a rabbit hole all on its own. As well as an amazing video gamer, he is also a super sweet dude. Rachel Dratch describes him and Seth Meyers as her comedy non-boyfriends, basically her comedy brothers. She's remained incredibly close to them. But he's also remained close to other cast members. He attended Andy Samberg and Seth Meyers' weddings, both in character as Hamilton.
Oh my gosh.
I would have paid good money just to see that. I mean, just a full character. Problem is, a lot of their families don't know the character. So all they know is there's this super racist weirdo walking around at the wedding, which is the most Will thing. Like that just is like, yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. He collects life preservers and construction helmets. He actually got his start as a published author. He wrote 101 Things Definitely Not to Do If You Want to Get a Chick. It was a comic that he wrote at 24, which he parlayed into his first gig, writing for the Jenny McCarthy Show, and then moving on to Letterman. One of the weirder things that I read is at one point Val Kilmer was trying to find a house in Malibu, so he was just couch surfing, and Will let him stay on his couch for a couple of months. And one night they were watching The Amazing Race, and they thought, that'd be awesome, and wanted to go on The Amazing Race. Their agents ultimately stopped them. Boo. Those agents did not really do the right thing. And then unfortunately time got away from them and it didn't happen. But yeah, just to illustrate how amazing a dude he is, he gave his entire per diem to the crew for MacGruber, which when he was filming the film MacGruber, his mom visited the set on the naked celery scene shooting day. So that must have been a little weird.
You think?
Yeah. It's like, but yeah. So as a part of a fundraising event for Boys and Girls Club of Venice, he auctioned off an opportunity to see a early cut of MacGruber with him and Ryan Philippe before its premiere. But he said if somebody paid $100,000, he'd take them out for yogurt twice a year for the rest of his life. Thought it was a joke, and someone called his bluff. So now,
wow.
Ever since the release of MacGruber, he's been taking this person out twice a year for yogurt.
They're going to develop a friendship.
Yeah. That, I mean, you don't do that and not actually start to like one another.
You would think you would explore it at least.
Yeah. And I mean, in the ultimate expression of how good a dude he is, like a true gentleman, when filming the last scene for The Last Man on Earth, he and Kristen Schaal had a sex scene after her character ate a can of beans, and she let one rip like crazy, and he took the bullet for it. He claimed it was his. So, just a true gentleman all around.
Wow. A gentleman of thoughts. Yes.
Yes, indeed.
Well, I think that I'm pretty excited that our guest today is the Grand Poobah over at the Saturday Night Network. It's John Schneider, and he is joined right now downstairs with Thomas. So let's join them in conversation.
JD and Matt, thank you so much. Yes, welcome to another episode, another wonderful conversation with a great guest. Welcome to the SNL Hall of Fame podcast. And today we are talking about, this is a personal favorite of mine. This is a chance for me and my guests to just be total geeks. It's almost for me like when Sammy Kay and I did the Vanessa Bayer episode last season. That's like 14 for you and 1 for me kind of thing. So this is what this is like with Will Forte, our nominee today. So to join me, another fellow Will Forte nerd, possibly Will Forte is one of my favorite, probably in the top 2 or 3 favorite cast members of mine personally. And I think for my guest, Will Forte falls under that category too. So I am joined by a friend, somebody who I greatly admire in the podcast. He's kind of like a podcasting influence for me personally. It is from the Saturday Night Network, John Schneider. Hey man, what's up? Thanks for joining me.
Hey Thomas, wow! I'm very. First of all, I'm very humbled that you would say that. Mutual respect here, and love what you've done with the show, and JD and Matt and everybody here. So thank you so much for having me back. And I have to say, Thomas, I maybe have podcasted about. I'm gonna throw out a guess here. I'm gonna say like 300 podcasts about SNL. I maybe have done over the last few years. I don't think I've ever been as excited to do a podcast as I am right now. Like this is one of the best things I could have ever done as an SNL podcaster is get to talk about Will Forte. He is definitely my favorite cast member of all time. I wouldn't be talking about SNL or podcasting about SNL or doing all the things that we're doing at the SNN if I didn't fall in love with Will Forte on the show and everything that he did. And I know I'm not alone with that. I know that there's so many people out there that Will Forte is such a big influence on. So thank you for having me today. I can't wait to have this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so giddy too. And then doing some refresh, because with Will Forte, I don't necessarily need to do research, quote unquote, but I like to refresh myself, watch sketches, go in with, having watched these sketches as close to recording time as possible so they could be fresh. And this is like the most fun, quote unquote, research I think that I've done for this entire show because I love Will Forte so much. So yeah, this is going to be great. Thanks so much for joining. I meant what I said as far as you being like a podcasting influence. What you've built at Saturday Night Network is just amazing. Like, so tell us, tell the listeners what's been going on over at the SNN. A lot, I know.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I mean, it's been pretty crazy. It's been great to get the show back after that writer's strike, and glad that everything turned out well over there. And then for season 49, it's just been nonstop coverage of the season as we go through all the live weeks. We have coverage right after the show is done airing. So we have this great group of people who stay up late with us and talk about the show. If you're watching on YouTube, you can always find our hot take shows and join us in the conversation. So let's say, you're tired, you're lying in bed, you just enjoy the show, but you just have to talk to somebody about it. It's a great place to go and hang out. Then we also have our Monday night roundtables where we're just breaking down the show even further, talking about the legacy of a specific host in a specific episode, and then our By the Number shows that we do on Wednesday that Mike Murray hosts for all the stats and turning SNL into a live sport. So that's our regular coverage. We also get to do some really cool interviews that we do on our show called SNL Stories. We just had Christine Ebersol, season 7 cast member. We just spoke to Bobby Moynihan. There's a lot of great ones out there as well. Now we're sort of turning our heads towards the end of season 49, finishing up all the coverage on that, doing some summer stuff, and then it's season 50. It's the big one. So we have lots of stuff planned for season 50, and I can't wait to get to all of that. And you got to come hang out with us at the Saturday Night Network.
Yeah, so this guy's built like a true network, like you and everybody else. Bill Kenny, Sammy Kay, the Andrews, everybody who's really closely involved. You got quite the community going at SNN. It's a true network. Like you have a Saturday night thing, a Monday thing, a Patreon thing, By the Numbers. So it's a really definitely a true network there. Maybe you can get Will Forte on like a SNL Stories one day.
That is like the dream. I'm hoping for that's the big one, or one of the big ones for sure. I'm hoping maybe for a special numbered show, maybe a 500th, maybe a 1,000th, something like that. I can convince him to do it. I have met Will Forte before. I actually went to go meet him on my birthday when he was at Just for Laughs. This was before I was doing SNL media coverage, but went to go talk to him, and he could not have been nicer. And I know that some of our podcasters have bumped into him over the last few years, and he said that he would do it. So I'm hoping one day we'll get him to come on board, and I think we're gonna have a blast whenever that does happen.
Yeah, that would be a biggie. So Will Forte, our nominee today on the SNL Hall of Fame, on the cast from 2002 to 2010. And from what I understand, John, that was basically the era that made you love the show? Like that whole, all those casts between 2002 and 2010, that whole era. So what were your impressions of Will Forte when you first saw him on SNL, this oddball?
Yeah, so very fun fact that he almost got hired the year prior, but I think he wanted to keep writing on that 70s show, which was also a show I enjoyed very much at the time. But so I'll go back to like my origin story for watching the show the first time. And I really fell in love with the show, from like 2005 to 2010. I was in high school then. And that for me was just like, Will was such a big part of that cast. But prior to that, I had tuned into SNL. I knew what it was. We had like friends who had older siblings who were watching it all the time. And at times I would just like turn on the show and just catch glimpses. And I remember seeing like Tina and Jimmy on the show and being like really intrigued. Some of, Smeigel's TV Funhouse stuff. But one time I remember my parents going out on a Saturday night and I turned on SNL and I was very like curious what I was going to see. And I saw Will Forte as Tim Calhoun, this politician who just like is so anxious and can't get anything out and just like nervous, flop sweating.
I think I would make a real good president because I'm a hockey dad, soccer uncle, football cousin, ping pong brother, and Donkey Kong best friend. My opponents have been using my full name to scare people. Is it my fault that my middle name is Boo?
I just fell in love. Like for me, there's just something about it that clicked, and getting to watch him throughout his time at the show, I've like psychoanalyzed this over the years, Thomas, where I'm like trying to figure out what it is for him that just, makes me laugh harder than anybody else. And I think it's because like, I think I'm like I have quirks, but I think I'm like a pretty normal person.
Yeah.
But like Will brings out the weird in me. Like he brings out something in my personality that isn't brought out by most people. And it's something that I watch on the screen and I just get purely happy. So in some of like the, saddest times of my life, I've turned on Will Forte sketches and he's just brightened my day.
That's such the mark of a good performer too. He does that for me as well. Like I'm a pretty normal, I'm probably a little more weird than you, I would say, like if we're doing a scale or
we have to ask listeners.
I'm guessing we'll take a poll or something, but I'll ask them I'm doing the hot take show, so maybe I'll ask chat to see about that. But you're right. So he brings out like the weird aspect of me too, like all those little things that I'm like, why do I relate to this? Like, because I kind of had that like weird side of me, but that's like the mark of a good performer is like he's relatable in that weirdness that maybe you didn't know you had until you watched him perform in some ways. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's reminds me a lot of like the friends that I chose like for my life. Like I have a very unique situation in my personal life where some of my friends have been my friends for over 20 years. Like these are friends from when I was really little, and I always like wonder like why I gravitated to a specific type of person, and it's like the people who will go the furthest with a joke. Like that, and like they have a lot of Will Forte qualities in them, and I just think I like to surround myself with people who are sort of like don't give a shit, and and will like take something really far, not offensively, but like I remember Seth Meyers telling this amazing story about Will Forte once on Late Night, where he said that I believe it was one of the writers, I'm blanking on the name of the specific writer, but one of the writers had been so hungry on a Tuesday night writing night and was writing all night and ordered Chinese food, and it took so long to get upstairs to the 17th floor, hours and hours. Finally, the delivery guy drops off the food, gets there. The writer is like so excited. Will Forte goes to pick up the bag and drops it out the window. It's one of the greatest things I've ever heard. And I'm just like, you got to look that up on YouTube and like watch Seth tell that story. It is so funny to me, and it is perfectly like encapsulates Will Forte and why everybody loves hanging out with him.
That's so oddball. That's so Will Forte. You honed in on something that relates to something that I wrote down, like a key word. I was thinking about Will Forte, and the word that keeps coming up for me is commitment. I think Will Forte, more than most cast members that have come through the show, is he's 100% committed to this sketch. No matter what, this character, this sketch, Will Forte is in it. And to me, John, when I see cast members, won't name names obviously, but like when I see cast members who maybe are less so, who I gravitate less toward, or maybe cast members who I feel slightly uncomfortable watching on screen, I think it's a lot of times because they lack commitment on screen. Because I see there's something that's not letting them just break out of their shell completely. With Will Forte, that was never the problem. Like, can you think of a performer on SNL that can rival? I mean, there's probably people who can rival, but is there any performer who could exceed Will Forte's commitment?
I think Will Ferrell probably is a good example.
Yeah.
I mean, the two Wills. I think Phil Hartman and Dana Carvey, you got to put that in that category a little bit too.
Those are all-time greats, though.
Yeah, I really do feel. But Will it has his own kind of commitment where he goes to one side that is so unique to the show. And, a lot of times on our podcast, when we're evaluating an episode, we'll talk about the 10-to-1 sketch. And he basically, that did exist prior to it, but, it's really the Will Forte slot in the show. Like, I think everyone that's come after him has always been looking for a Will Forte to be the weird sketch. And I think the committed weird is really what people are looking for in that 10-to-1. It's not just here's a random weird one-off character that's quirky. It's somebody who is so weird that it just makes everybody in the sketch and out of the sketch just amazed at that person. I think Sarah Sherman does that sometimes as well, and I wish we got that more on the show. But yeah, I mean, I think you nailed it. I think that is a quality that we look for in Will. But I will also say one other quality, Thomas, that I always stuck out to me about Will was that he's a very normal, good-looking guy.
Right.
And maybe barring the time for Last Man on Earth that he shaved half his beard and half his head, he is so normal looking, and he's a secret sicko. That's what I love, is that you would never know that this guy in his head is an evil genius. And I love that about him.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things when I first saw Will Forte on screen. I'm like, okay, he's just kind of your standard issue male cast member that they hired, and he's just going to be cookie cutter. But just real quick, he totally dispelled all the notions that I had just by looking at him. You're right. There's this sicko. I love that word. That's a perfect word to describe a lot of what's underneath the surface of Will Forte. Is just that sicko. Right there, a nondescript, normal-looking guy, but then something comes bursting out of him that's just very weird. And when I think about all-time greats, Hall of Famers, whatever, I think it scores bonus points, especially with Will Forte, that he had his own unique lane in the show. You can see a sketch and say that's a Will Forte sketch, and that's rare, and that's something that I when it comes to SNL, when I see a cast member like that, I really gravitate toward it because that's a rare quality to have, where it's just that's Will Forte's lane. You mentioned 10-to-1, any sort of oddball thing. Andrew Dismukes kind of has that right now. That's why I kind of gravitate toward him, because it's
totally
Dismukes has a stamp. But to me, that scores Will Forte bonus points for having his own unique lane, John.
I agree. I mean, look, I think we had a very interesting discussion when we did the SNN's cast member countdown. So Will Forte was voted 18th overall by the viewers. I was doing my rankings at the same time. I had him at 21, so really around the same range, but slightly lower than that. And you may be saying, John, how can this person be your favorite cast member? And you have him at 21st. And the truth is that I think that, when you're looking at the 50-year legacy of the show, there are a lot of performers that are extremely well-rounded, that have contributed and just, built in every aspect of the show. And I think that Will had the ability to make the show all about him, like an Eddie Murphy at times, like a Kristen Wiig at times, like a Will Ferrell. But the show was never built around Will. Will was always 1 or 2 parts or 3 parts of an episode, and you would watch his sketches and you may walk away feeling like they were your favorites. But it was very rare when you watched an episode of Saturday Night Live during Will Forte's tenure that you're like, that is a Will Forte episode, or this season was Will Forte's season. So I also needed to be objective and fair about that. Now, I don't think that disqualifies him from the Hall of Fame whatsoever, because I think that like the Hall of Fame is a whole other thing where you're talking about people who built the legacy of the show. And I think he's very, very much a part of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And still, I mean, you said 21st. He ended up on 18th on the countdown.
18 on the cast, 21 on my list.
And
where do you have him?
List, I think I had him probably about 16th ultimately, even though he's one of my two or three. Yeah, he's one of my 2 or 3 favorite cast members, but favorite and then I'm trying to put together like a greatest. So it's different. But to me, like top 20, top 25, that's right smack in the middle of Hall of Fame territory right there if we're talking 160 or something now cast members. So to me, Will Forte is a slam dunk Hall of Famer. So this is going to be like the listener will know where I'm coming from and where you're coming from, obviously, with this episode. But I was surprised, I think, that I had him higher than you. But really, you're right. Like, it's the same ballpark. So we both view him about equally, I think.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing the other thing that I factored into my cast rankings was also, his contribution after his time in the cast. He does leave in 2010, and I think that he, we'll get to this full conversation of his career, but I do think he could have stayed an extra couple of years, and that really would have helped him in terms of legacy, like had he left at the same time as Andy Samberg and Kristen Wiig. He has only come back to host once. That episode that he hosted was one of the weirdest episodes in SNL history. I think we could say that now.
Yeah.
So, that to me, is a factor that I think about in terms of overall contribution to the series. So, these are things to think about, but overall, I mean, what a career that he put up at the show. I can't wait to get into it.
Just amazing, and we can get into it. What is maybe the first sketch or character that you think about when you think of Will Forte?
All right, so I got 2 that are my quintessential Will Forte sketches. These are 2 of my favorite sketches of all time. I've had the trouble of deciding which one is truly my favorite of all time. But if I had somebody who came to me, said, I've never watched a Saturday Night Live sketch before, which one should I start with? I'm going to start with Jeff Montgomery, the sex offender.
And just out of curiosity, what exactly is your Halloween costume?
I'm a sex offender.
Excuse me?
I'm a sex offender. For Halloween.
A sex offender?
Yes, pretty convincing, huh? Here, watch this. I'm Jeff Montgomery. By law, I'm required to inform you that I'm a repeat sex offender, and I'll be living in your neighborhood. It's a great costume, right?
Okay. This to me like encapsulates everything I look for in the show. It is so fantastic. This is a sketch, by the way, that was cut once previously from the Brian Williams episode in 2007. It was then brought back for the John Hamm episode in October 2008. And this is a guy who rings the doorbell, trick or treat, and says that he's dressed as a sex offender and needs some papers to be signed. And the confusion between Jon Hamm and Will Forte as they discuss, are you dressed as a sex offender or are you actually a sex offender, is one of the funniest things I have ever seen. And Will Forte plays this beautifully.
It's beautiful wordsmithing by Will Forte to dance around the fact that he's a sex offender needing to go around the neighborhood. And this is a great example of understated Will Forte, in my opinion. And I think the other one that you're going to mention, that I have a feeling you're going to mention, is more so on the bigger side a little bit. But this Jeff Montgomery one is more understated Will in a lot of ways.
Yes, and I want to credit Colin Jost, who wrote that sketch with him. Yeah. So that, the 2 of them, I mean, what a team that is. Colin's wrote some fantastic sketches over the years. But yes, I would say this is the sketch that I would show people the most of Will Forte. I struggle whether it's truly my favorite sketch, because there's one that like sentimentally means more to people, but I don't know if you get it if you're not an SNL fan. So do you want me to jump to that one?
Yeah, I think you're gonna. Well, go ahead. But
okay. So I also want to say Jeff Montgomery did come back a second time with Tim McGraw, which is. But yes, the one that means the most to me in my heart is the dancing coach sketch with Peyton Manning.
Yep.
And that to me is like I think I can say it's my favorite sketch of all time. This is where Peyton Manning is not a football player. He's a basketball player in the sketch, and it's halftime in a basketball game, like a college basketball situation. And him and Keenan and Fred and Andy and Bill and Jason, they all come in to the locker room, and Will Forte is the coach and starts talking to them about, being more motivated.
All right, listen up. I see a lot of mopey faces around here. Granted, we're down by 34 points. McMillan broke his ankle, and our cheerleaders have started cheering for the other team. That doesn't mean we can't come back and win this thing. And Wally, you got something you want to say?
Yeah, Coach. Guys.
And gives them the speech that leads to Will Forte playing the theme or one of the songs from Casino Royale, and he starts dancing. You definitely got to look this up. If you can find it online, because Will Forte dancing and making everybody laugh, including, watching Bill Hader's face in the back of the sketch. Honestly, when this came out and I saw this live, we watched this sketch maybe 100 times, Thomas. That's how much we watched it. It was so funny to me, and I cannot watch it without laughing. Great. One of my greatest sketches of all time.
This is amazing physical comedy by Will Forte. I'm glad you paired this one with the Jeff Montgomery one at the top, because it's almost like the comedic yin and the yang for Will Forte. Like I said, Jeff Montgomery's more like it's about how Will Forte's delivering the lines, and it's more understated. And this one, it's just like physical comedy, these dance moves, how he times it out with the song. You're right. Like Keenan's almost the first one to break. Like he and Peyton have to cover their faces with towels just to not break. And Fred's usually like pretty, keeps it together. Famously in the Debbie Downer sketch, Fred was the one kind of like watching everybody going, okay, guys, we still have a scene to do. In this one, this is one of the few times that I saw Fred almost break. And Bill, of course, Bill Hader always does. But how could you not? This was such great Will Forte physical comedy. Like I absolutely love this one, John.
Honestly, and I think a lot of cast members feel like this is one of their favorite sketches of all time. Bobby Moynihan, when he joined us, he mentioned this sketch at one point about how this is one of his favorite sketches, and then he got to be in the second one in his first episode, and it was just like so exciting for him to see the dancing, the dancing coach. And I just, like I said, it's one of those visual things that you got to go watch this. It is so amazing. The commitment from Will Forte, absolutely fantastic. So to me, those are the two quintessential Will Forte sketches. There's a lot more, though, I can't wait to get into.
Yeah, I have a quintessential one as well. It comes toward the end of his SNL tenure, and it's the one that he and Jason Sudeikis did with Blake Lively, the potato chip thief.
Janelle, how many potato chips did you put in here today?
35.
I thought so. You didn't happen to take any out for yourself?
Oh, God, no. Why, that would be stealing.
It certainly would. Janelle, what would you say if I told you that man right there is nothing but a common potato chip thief?
Ah! Potato chip thief!
What?
To me, if I wanted to show somebody like this is Will Forte's humor, this is Will Forte's playground, I might show them Potato Chip Thief too. That'd be one of the first ones that I show them. Like just displaying Will Forte's like humor, what he brought to SNL. In this one, he plays it big. Like it's maybe a little more understated at the beginning, but he ends up like yelling, screaming. But underneath that screaming, he says some really funny things. So Potato Chip Thief, John, would be to me like another quintessential Will Forte.
Yeah, so I love this sketch a lot. It has a lot of elements of other sketches, which is maybe why I don't put this at the top of my Will Forte list. Like I would say that this is, and I get what you're saying. I think for a lot of people, this is the top Will Forte stuff. For me, I'd say this is maybe like my B tier Will Forte, just because it has elements of other things that I think ultimately led to this occasion. It's a brilliant sketch. Love Jason Sudeikis in this as well. Love Blake Lively. Like this is a really, really great sketch. I believe this is John Solomon and Will Forte in this one. John Solomon wrote a lot with Will when he was on the show, but chewing the potato chip and spitting it into the mouth, which is just like, again, something you got to see. I know that happened a little bit in the 2000s, the baby bird stuff with Will Ferrell and all that stuff. So the grossness of the sketch, I think, really does work here. But it does lose its luster a little bit if you've seen it before, whereas I think the dancing coach like is just like nonstop money. But yeah, ultimately I do really, really love this sketch. And I think that the commitment here from Will is fantastic. And the reason that I felt like it has, stuff from Will's earlier career is because him yelling is another staple of Will Forte with the Zell Miller impression, which you ever go see that? One of his like talk show guys that he did. And like, he would just yell. That's like an early Will Forte career thing where he would just yell so much that his face would turn red.
Senator Miller, knowing what we know now, how can we possibly avoid such destruction from future tsunamis?
Tsunamis! I'm sick of hearing about tsunamis! Where I'm from, we call them waves! And there's one thing we did when a tsunami came a-walking up onto our property! We boxed its ears and told it to get!
And that is also incorporated into the sketch a little bit. But I love this one too, Thomas.
Yeah, definite Zell Miller vibes, one of his recurring characters. Zell Miller, Georgia politician. He was I think Zell Miller said some crazy things, especially about Barack Obama. And then like Will Forte just sort of turned him into a caricature completely. I do want to talk about Will Forte as a breath of fresh air for the show too. Because I think, and I know it's subjective, but he started at a time where I think SNL was trying to find an identity. Will Ferrell had just left, and they didn't quite have an identity. They were playing around with, like, do we push Seth Meyers as the star of the show? Who's the star of the show? What's our humor? What's our viewpoint? And I think Will Forte was a breath of fresh air amidst them trying to figure themselves out. I mean, the show. And things like The Falconer. That premiered in season 28, and that was so... To me, that was so unlike a lot of what was on SNL at the time that it was a relief sometimes to see The Falconer, something like that pop up on screen. And The Falconer is one of the things that Will Forte is best known for, but it was just like a relief for me as a viewer when it popped up in this era of SNL.
Donald, we're starving to death. This land that once filled us with life is now barren. One of us must search elsewhere. And only one of us can fly. No, Donald, you! Oh, Donald, even in these desperate times, you still retain that dry sense of humor. Now you must fly away from these woods and bring back something, a possum, a squirrel, anything to keep us alive. So be gone, my friend. Bring us life! Bring us life!
Yeah, I do like The Falconer a lot. I think those sketches are, pretty forgotten because of all the great things that Will Forte did after. But I truly believe those are great sketches. That's Will with Eric Slovin and Leo Allen. I think Eric Slovin was the guy who, by the way, Will dumped his Chinese food out. I forgot the name before. But yeah, those Falconer sketches are really great and just so weird and bizarre for a time where SNL's writing was a little choppy and they were trying to figure it out, like you said, in that, post Will Ferrell world and pre Kristen Wiig, Bill Hader, Jason Sudeikis, and Andy Samberg world. And I think that those sketches are really great. I think they did 9 of them, and they are very enjoyable. I love Will getting to talk to objects like that, and I think or animals like that. And I do think you get to see more of this in Last Man on Earth if you ever go watch that show. Yeah, that he brings out some of his Falconer character.
Yeah, especially like at the beginning of the series, The Last Man on Earth, when he's talking to the balls, the various balls that become his friends, that are like placed inside the bar. I can definitely see that. I'm gonna go ahead and call Donald an object too, because you could see one of the funny things is you could see the strings on that puppet. Like I'm sure that was a choice. Let's make the strings show and make it look as ridiculous as possible. And John, sometimes when I, as a viewer, when I complain about like little writing things and stuff, one of my chief things is escalation. Like, how do you do escalation? What's proper escalation? This sketch needs more escalation. I always say that. Like, it could have been bumped up just another notch. With The Falconer, to me, a lot of these sketches were just perfect examples of how you escalate, especially a recurring sketch. How do you find escalation in something recurring? I think Will Forte and the people behind this Falconer sketch just did that escalation beautifully.
I totally agree. I think that's a great point for these. You know, there are some other sketches from early in his career that I think are really important to bring up that are often lost upon people. So I think now is a good time to maybe pivot to some of those. One of those is from the season 28, episode 14 episode with Queen Latifah. I don't know if you know what I'm going to say, but this one is Give Up the Ham.
Give up the ham.
Such a good sketch that is like, because of the, I don't know if it's like the song, like it doesn't get put up a lot, and like you got to Google it and look up this, but basically people fighting over a ham at a grocery store, and then the sketch breaks down with Will Forte singing "Give Up the Ham."
Let go. You let go. Ham stealer. You're a ham stealer. You let it go.
Stop at this instance. Everybody needs to just cool out. Give up the ham. Let the ham go and give up the ham. Oh, yeah. Give up the ham. Peace and unity. Give up the ham. All right.
And it is so good. And like, I think maybe the first moment of really seeing like how great this guy is. I know that him and Fred sort of did some stuff on Update, but like this was to me the first like major moment for Will Forte on the show.
It's commitment to something ridiculous, or like a commitment to an everyday thing, like shopping at a grocery store. Say, so how can we take that scene, that scenario, and play it up into something ridiculous? And it was that Amy Poehler and Queen Latifah. I think Rachel Dratch comes in as Amy Poehler's friend. So all these people start walking in, but then Will just totally owns it with this song. Like, that's just total commitment. Again, like you'll never have trouble with Will Forte and commitment. Give Up the Ham is one of the ones that I go back to semi-regularly. Honestly, if I need a good laugh, I do that. That's a really good shout out. That's from season 28, episode 14. One that I thought of, season 28, the next episode 15. It was a sketch that he did with Jimmy Fallon, Salma Hayek. It was called Cardboard Box. Do you remember this one, John?
I do. Yeah, go ahead.
Will Forte, so he played a husband who was suspecting his wife of cheating. So Will Forte's character mailed himself to their house in this big cardboard box so he could catch them in the act. And this is just, to me, like, we're talking early examples, like such a wonderful early example of a truly absurd premise that Will Forte completely sells. And he has to do this inside a box that he's not even on camera most of the sketch. And what he has to do and what he has to convey from inside a cardboard box is like chef's kiss, like beautiful work.
Yeah, he does this thing sometimes where he can, like we talked about Zell Miller with yelling till he's red, but sometimes he does this like angry yell in a calm way that it's very hard to describe unless you hear it. But he did this recently on like I Think You Should Leave in one of the episodes, Tim Robinson's show, where he's like almost like he like fell on the sidewalk and he was like under a car, but he wasn't like really stuck. But yeah, he does this thing sometimes where he's like stuck in a place and he's just like, someone will say something to him and he'll like respond with this sarcasticness in his voice that's like, oh, of course you would think that, you know, like that type of thing. And it's just so brilliant to me. And this is a real deep cut comment, Thomas, but this is a great sketch.
You don't think he has any idea what's going on with us, do you?
Oh, please. That ignoramus doesn't suspect a thing.
He does now!
Ray? Where are you?
Right here! Right here! I'm in the box!
What the hell are you doing in the box? I thought you went to Cleveland.
I was, but I mailed myself home to lay this little trap for you. And now, after laying in wait for 28 hours, the trap is sprung! Ha!
28 hours?
It's awesome. I think Jimmy Fallon was hosting this, or was Salma Hayek? No,
Salma Hayek was hosting.
Salma Hayek was hosting it. Jimmy Fallon was still on the cast. Obviously, it's season 28. But yeah, this is like kind of a deep cut. I think Will Forte has a lot of these. It's like these one-offs.
Yeah.
Where you get reminded of it, and it was like, oh yeah, Will Forte did this.
Well, let me take you to one of the greatest episodes in SNL history, I think, which is the Jack Black episode from 2005, that December episode that had, Lazy Sunday and all that stuff in it, that really like changed the era of the show and brought on this new golden age. And one of the sketches there that really cemented, Will's place in the show throughout this golden age is that spelling bee sketch. That's very famous Will Forte moment where they ask him to spell business. And he keeps asking questions back, and he goes on and on and on and on. And it is the ultimate commitment to the bit as he continues to go on forever.
Q, M, T, S, D, T, Q, M, P, R, F, T, D, P, D, P, L, H, R, K, T, B, T, F, business.
And I think that so many people growing up, writing sketch comedy, have tried to find a take on this specific sketch. And I don't know that anyone's ever matched the level at which Will Forte can pull something like the spelling bee sketch off.
It's a very specific type of humor where you're testing how far you can push the joke. And sometimes, so like you're testing the cycle of a joke almost. So you make the joke, it's funny, and it hits the peak, and then almost becomes less funny. But then he's still doing it, and it's less funny, but then he does it enough to where it circles back around, and it's really funny again. That's a very specific type of thing, a very brave, I think maybe possibly brave thing to do on a show like SNL. I can see people doing that on let's make a YouTube video and try this out. But to do something like that on a show like SNL, where you're almost messing with the viewer in some ways and testing their patience, but there's a really great reward ultimately. I think the spelling bee sketch is a perfect example, especially like the run he goes on of saying Q, I don't know how many times in a row.
But what's great about something like this is that I don't think there is a person that came before Will Forte that can pull off this sketch as well. Like, you think about great orators in SNL history, like people like Dan Aykroyd or Phil Hartman, who can just say things really quickly but still make the listener understand them. And it's so brilliant at the speed at which they communicate, whether it's as a pitchman or even just as a game show host or something like that. But Will Forte can say things slower than the average person, and it doesn't sound like too slow where it's not entertaining. And that is like a whole other level of brilliance that I don't know that I've seen before prior to Will Forte.
Yeah, his voice, it's almost like ASMR in a lot of ways. Like with this spelling bee one, you mentioned Tim Calhoun, and that's one of the things that stood out, is almost like a low-key ASMR kind of delivery with Tim Calhoun. He was a little bit nervous, but it gets that he's just that like whispering, but not, and just, it's just that like a very unique delivery. And I had written a note. So spelling bee, as far as like testing, see how far you can push the joke. It also reminded me of something else that he did on Weekend Update when he appeared with Amy, I think Amy and Seth, in season 34, and he appeared as himself, and he was recapping a Senate vote.
When Friday's tally was finally counted, and that was all she wrote, people asked, how did that pass? And how did everybody vote? Joe Bonner, Republican, yay. Terry Everett, Republican, yay. Mike Rogers, Republican, yay. Robert Adderholt, Republican, nay. Bud Kramer, Democrat, yay. Spencer Beck is Republican, yay. Arthur Davis, Democrat, yay.
So this was an example of him kind of taking a joke so far that maybe it becomes unfunny, but then it circles back around. So he made up this song and recapping how certain senators voted, and then Amy interrupted him, and he's scolding Amy about how rude it is to interrupt your friends when they're singing. And this reminded me of Spelling Bee in like, how far can we push something?
It is really great. I mean, he basically started on SNL when he kept coming on and doing songs with Fred Armisen a couple times. and, you know, in different variations of that. But yeah, he will come on Update and do songs on a regular basis throughout his SNL tenure, and he will push things to the absolute limit. And, you know, I think a great sketch to jump to off of this conversation is Fly High Duluth, which to me is like an underrated classic.
John.
Yes, this is this good SNL podcaster, which is that's from the Scarlett Johansson episode, and it's basically like a TV talk show where they're like, "Oh, we have a band that's finally going to come out and do the theme song for the show," and they just like keep going and going and going with the song where they keep thinking it's over, but it's not. And Will Forte is like drinking and going like full rock star with it, and it is so brilliant. I cannot wait to hear what you think of the sketch because I don't get to talk about it enough.
Mama! Don't you point that gun at me! I said, please, Mama! Don't you point that gun at me! Because my love is consecrated in the blood of the Apache nations! Oh, Duluth, yeah!
It's an example to me. Well, by the way, first of all, as an example of the breadth of Will Forte's sketches, we had mentioned Spelling Bee. That was season 31, episode 9. Fly High Duluth was season 31, episode 10. So this came like one episode after that. Like, you can look through all his great sketches and you're like, dang, that happened. Those happen like back to back. And that happens a lot. Like on my list, I'm seeing like back to back to back episodes. But yeah, Fly High Duluth is again one of those where I frequently go back and watch it. And it's just, again, that commitment to the sketch, the commitment to the bit. It's so ridiculous. He's like this Jim Morrison type of guy singing this theme song for a show in Duluth, Minnesota. And he's like with Scarlett Johansson. So his lover, his she-lion or she-tiger, I think he called her or something like that.
I think her name is it's like they're Wally and Char.
Char, yeah. So it's just like, this is a wonderful example to me of like Will Forte's commitment to the sketch. Just doing these ridiculous things, chugging, which I assume was tea or something like that in a Jack Daniels bottle. But no, this is one of my favorites. And I never get the sense that Will Forte is self-conscious even for one split second up there. And so to me as a viewer, it makes me feel like I'm in good hands with Will Forte in this sketch.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is one that he put together with Eric Kenward, who's now a producer on the show. But yeah, I mean, this is another brilliant sketch that you just got to break down. It's a very long sketch, and sometimes, you know, my personal preference is not to go too long with sketches unless we're talking about like one of the great debate sketches in SNL history that really has like something to say. I think then you can push things a little bit, just my opinion. But you know, I think, you know, I prefer shorter sketches, but the joke here is that, you know, Will is going to push this as far as it goes. And they've done this a couple times in the talk show format in SNL history where things just like break down to an extreme, and you need somebody who can, you know, who can drive the ship when that's happening and not let the sketch go off course to the point where people are like, oh, they're doing the same joke over and over again. And why was it so long? Why did it drag? Will Forte never lets that happen. He always lets it escalate. He always lets it get to another point that's interesting. Like, I find that there's never a Will Forte sketch I'm watching and I'm like, I wish I saw less of that.
No, you're completely right. Like, by the end of this Duluth live sketch, like, they're doing a full-on breakdown. Like, he's starting and he's kind of saying the lyrics are kind of weird, but you're like, okay, this is kind of like a weird kind of hippie or 70s rock band doing this, but okay, like, it's kind of weird. But then you're right, like it escalates and escalates to the point where like Fred's doing this full drum solo, Andy's shredding on the guitar, he's breaking the guitar, Will's screaming on the mic, like it. So yeah, the escalation, that's what beautiful escalation, and something that I always look for as an SNL fan. Yeah, go check that out. That was season 31, episode 10. And with Will Forte, we haven't talked about impressions so much or anything. And I have kind of somewhat of a hot take for you.
Okay.
I actually think I actually think he was a decent George W. Bush.
Ooh, okay.
I really do. And I think it suffered because he had to follow Will Ferrell's George W. Bush. That was its own thing. But I think just in a vacuum, I think he could have really made that work, because I think he has the type of personality to where he can play understated, but he could also say weird things and be squirrely and have that bizarre nature underneath the surface, which was George W. Bush and kind of how Will Ferrell depicted it. But I think it suffered because he had to follow Will Ferrell. But I think in a vacuum, and going back to rewatch some of these, I was thinking to myself, like, I think he's a pretty good George W. Bush, honestly.
You know, we're roughly $7 billion in debt. But don't worry, I got a plan. I've decided to consolidate all of our debt with one of those debt consolidation companies. That's right. We're gonna go with Ditech. Like me, you've probably seen their commercials late at night on ESPN2. You know, the ones with the guy who says, "Lost another loan to Ditech." It's a funny commercial.
I think he's a decent impressionist, and that's a very interesting take. Now, I think that the decline in the show post Will Ferrell, I think, gets unfairly associated with the Bush impression a little bit, and that sort of falls on to people like Will Forte and Sudeikis and Daryl Hammond, who tried to do it for a bit. Like, I think people were upset that Will Ferrell wasn't around anymore, and that was like nobody really gave it a chance. And the show has like a history of not being able to transition over these iconic impressions in a way, maybe besides Daryl as Bill Clinton, who took that from Phil Hartman. I think that maybe is the only exception. But yeah, I see what you're saying. I just don't know that I ever really gave it a chance. As much as I loved Will Forte, I wasn't like, we're talking about like a post 9/11 world where people are pretty down on Bush in general. And, Will Ferrell made Bush lovable because he was like a frat guy. And that's what he turned him into, like a bro and a frat guy. And I think that Forte never got the characterization or the writing to be able to turn the sketch and make it something of its own in the way that Will Ferrell had that leash to do.
Yeah, you couldn't make the George W. Bush around when Will Forte was playing him lovable like Will Ferrell did. I'm going to confuse that the whole darn show. Will Ferrell, Will Forte. So Will Forte's George W. Bush, I think it was at a disadvantage because of just where George W. Bush was as a political figure around that time. The kind of the whatever shine was on him, if you could say that, was worn off quite a bit around that time. So you couldn't do the same type of depiction as Will Ferrell did. And I was like you, I didn't really give it a chance, but this is just sort of in hindsight, kind of rewatching, it sort of dawned on me. I'm like, this could, it's not like he was the best impressionist or like mimic, but you don't have to be. If SNL history has taught us anything about impressions, is you don't have to sound exactly like the person or even look exactly like the person. I think he could have found an angle there. I think he had the right personality to do it. And I saw something in these George W. Bush impressions that I hadn't really given a chance prior.
I mean, he did it for a while. I think he did it for over.
He did 20 of them.
Yeah, like maybe 2 years he was doing it. So sort of like finished up a little bit of, George W. Bush's tenure of the show. I guess they handed it to Sudeikis for like the baton for like a little bit. But yeah, I don't know. I always felt like Will Forte, like I said, he brings such a bright light to the show and stuff like that. And I don't think that the country was like very happy in general with Bush and, was looking for a change. And like, I don't know that it wasn't the right place and the right time for him to play him, I think, ultimately. But I love the hot take. I think it's a great hot take. It's like, there's a lot of what if scenarios. Like, do I think if Will Forte was around a couple years earlier, could he have played the original like incarnation of Bush? That's a possibility. I think so.
Well, I think,
yeah, go ahead.
Well, I think you're right that you mentioned that maybe his George W. Bush impression unfairly gets lumped in with why the show was struggling around that time. I agree with that. I think there were a lot of factors. I just think where the country was, where humor was at the time, and I brought this up a few times on the show around 2000, let's say 2002 to like 2005. That was a very weird time for humor in general. It was a lot of edgelord stuff. It was just a lot of really broad humor, I would say. And so I think maybe the show suffered from just where humor was over in our society, just in general.
Yeah. Look, I think our community of like SNL diehards looks back at that time very like unfondly, because you watch these things oftentimes, you go back and you watch these things on a binge and you'll see like all these episodes and you'll see the decline of the show. And I'm not disqualifying people's feelings about those seasons, because I would definitely rank them pretty low. But I think Tina Fey often mentions how it was a very hard time to write comedy, just like post 9/11. Everybody, nobody wanted to talk about politics. The U.S. was like invading countries around the world and then potentially invading the wrong countries. And like, there was like all this crazy politics stuff going on that nobody really wants to talk about. And people wanted to, as far as, Tina was concerned, is that people wanted to turn on SNL on a Saturday night and not think about these things. So they focused more of their writing around pop culture. And the problem when you do that is that the references and the sketches become very dated. So to go back and watch like season 29 and season 30, I don't know, almost 20 years later, you're like, this doesn't hold up as well as the things that came before it or the things that came after it. So I think there's a lot of things working against it, though I will say Will Forte was a bright spot in a little bit of a dark time of the show.
Yeah, breath of fresh air for me, definitely. And since I'm confusing Will Ferrell and Will Forte, as probably a lot of people did around that time, I want to talk about a sketch that I love that has both of them in it. Okay. When Will Ferrell came back to host in season 30, toward the end of that season, it was a sketch called Pepper Grinder.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, this is one that I think slips through the cracks for a lot of people too. So basically, Will Forte's character, he and his wife are celebrating their anniversary at dinner, and Will Ferrell, oddly, plays a college student. You have to suspend your disbelief there for that real quick. And basically, Will Forte's character makes Will Ferrell's waiter character grind the pepper for a long time to teach him about grit and perseverance and everything. And this is just like, to me, Will is so good at taking an everyday situation to like a dramatic absurdity.
Sir, my arm is starting to burn.
Louis, that's enough! Stay out of this, Jamie! This is between me and the boy!
I can't lose this job, sir.
Then keep grinding!
Oh, God, the pain.
Grind, son, grind!
Oh, God, it burns!
Grind it!
Please, sir, please!
Grind it!
Oh!
Grind!
I'm going down!
Run, you woman! Go! Grind it! Grind it!
He's working with another master at that, Will Ferrell. So as a comedy nerd, as an SNL nerd, John, this type of sketch is like a dream for me.
I love this sketch. It's a great one, and it's great seeing like two legends, play off of each other. This is the type of sketch that you watch as a, when we're putting together a reel of Will Forte sketches, which is essentially what we're doing here, and then giving this off to the Academy of voters to go vote for Will Forte. I want the listeners to consider something here, which is watch this sketch and then think about if Will Forte could have fit in any era of the show. And this is a sketch that shows you why he could have. Like, he could have done this sketch in the original cast by far. Like, they could have fit in really well with a couple of people here and showed them, like I could just picture like a Gilda Radner sitting across from the table and like a Dan Aykroyd with the pepper grinder. Like, you could picture these things when you see these sketches, because he just fits in so well with any cast, because he is such a unique archetype that I think really molds to the people around him. So I do feel like that is why hosts, it was probably their dream to be in a Will Forte sketch, because he is such a great scene partner.
Yeah, it was amazing to watch them work. And Rachel Dratch does a really good job with her role and her comments throughout this sketch. And now that I'm thinking about it and thinking about kind of the traits of Will Forte that we've been talking about all episode, I think the pepper grinder sketch really has a bunch of them all wrapped in one. So you have that commitment, completely 100% commitment. You have the escalation. It's what this sketch is built on, is that escalation that you're not quite expecting. You have the more kind of subtle Will Forte and good line deliveries at the beginning, especially. You have Will Forte just going nuts and yelling in the sketch. So I think this pepper grinder sketch like encompasses all the a lot of the positive traits that we've talked about with Will Forte. John, am I wrong to say this is the perfect Will Forte sketch?
Oh, there's so many though. That's the problem.
Yeah,
is that sure. There's every sketch is the perfect Will Forte.
I'm just getting excited. I'm just using hyperbole at this point too.
I like it. But yeah, I know. I agree. I think this is like I said, it represents a lot about what I like about Will Forte, which is. This is one of those sketches. I think there's another sketch that he does that is a comparable sketch to this one, and this is like later in his career. But I'm just trying to remember. It's one where he's like, maybe you can place this for me in my mind, but it's one where like they're trying to decide like who's gonna pick up the check, and then like he insists that he's gonna pick it up. And that one is so great. I need to find where that was. It was called "I Got This." I think if you look it up on YouTube. That's from season 35, and it was like a game show basically.
Yes,
that was trying to figure out who.
You mentioned it's a game show. Yes,
it's a game show. Bill Hader was trying to figure out who's going to settle the bill, and I honestly think that like that could be the same character from the Pepper Grinder sketch, like him just playing this like older gentleman about like who's going to pay the bill and stuff like this. And this is it's in one of Will's last episodes as a cast member, but it's a really good sketch.
Check's still out there, gentlemen.
I got this.
Your money's no good here. I got this.
Well, Dad, come on. You're getting on in years, and I want to show you my love before you pass. I got this.
I'm only 58. I got this.
Hey, you introduced me to jazz. I got this.
You helped me to learn eBay. I got this.
Honey, I got my MasterCard right here. I could just...
Not a chance! I got this.
I got this.
This is the woman I will be buried next to. She comforts me when my hernia acts up. The least I can do for this blessed angel is buy her spaghetti on her birthday. I got this.
Impressive. Good rap.
When people complain, like they see, another game show sketch, I think the game show format is perfect for a sketch comedy show. Especially, you can talk about technical reasons, blocking, the way the studio's set up, all of that. But I don't scoff at game show sketches just because they're game show sketches. We've had a lot of really clever ones recently. Yeah. This is an example, and you just have to have the right premise and the right performers. And we certainly had that, especially with the premise of this and with Will Forte.
My problem with game show sketches is just that people don't really, there like aren't that many new game shows. That's the problem, right? But I guess that's the, evolution of media.
Yeah, that's why you invent a game show called like I Got This. Yeah.
Yes, but this is a great sketch. I think Thomas, we talked about how great of a performer is Will is with performing with basically anybody, but I do think that he's also built chemistry with cast members that he has seen as like his ultimate scene partners, and that may have developed like later in his career, so much so that I wish he could have stayed on the show more. But I think that him and Jason Sudeikis on the show together is an all-time duo that people talk about and still reference to this day of like, oh, that could be a Forte and Sudeikis. And we haven't even talked about any of their sketches together, where they are so brilliant. I'll start with the ESPN guys, the Pete Twinkle and Greg Stink. This is a sketch that sort of premiered like very late in Will Forte's career at the show, where I think it was in his last season. This is season 35, and then we get it a bunch of times in that season. But it's all like ESPN Classic. So if that, like, does that channel still exist, by the way, ESPN Classic, or did they retire that?
Yeah, I think it does.
Okay.
Shout out ESPN Classic. It's where I watched the like 85 Bears on ESPN Classic.
Nice. Yeah, I didn't know if it still exists with like YouTube being around. But basically, so ESPN Classic, you go on and you see like all of these like random sports, like, pool and bowling, darts, curling, shadow curling. I did that once, a couple times. But and basically like Pete Twinkle and Greg Stink, Jason and Will are the commentators. And, Sudeikis is like your brilliant classic, like ESPN play-by-play guy. And Will Forte as Greg Stink is the color commentator. And he always like heads over to him to say something, and he has like nothing to say. And their back and forth are incredible.
Wow, look at this, look at that. Oh, and quite a shot. Unbelievable, look at that. Oh, a big kick. Oh, she loves God. She loves God. Greg, how many points do you think she gets for a shot like that?
Oh, I don't know, 5.
Okay. You just kind of pulled that number out of thin air, didn't you, buddy?
Well, you put me on the spot. I did not know what to say, so I looked down at my hand, I saw 5 fingers, and I went for it.
I love it. I gotcha.
Why is it so cold in here?
Well, we're in an ice rink, buddy.
That makes sense.
And I know this is a Will thing, like a Will podcast, but also like Jason's ad reads to me are like some of the funniest things I've ever seen on the show. But just their brilliance together, all-time great sketch. What do you think of that one?
Yeah, Will Forte is so brilliant at playing like dim-witted but likable. He says dumb things, but like you root for him as much as you could root for that character in like a 4-minute sketch. But you really root for Greg Stink, and he just plays off like just being oblivious, being dim-witted. This is another one of those where like the delivery and the line read needs to be perfect. You can't stumble or else it loses that pop in the sketch. And there, I brought this up, I forgot, maybe it was in the Jason Sudeikis episode. But these Greg Stink and Pete Twinkle sketches, I think set a template for some, at least one other duo that we saw on SNL. It reminded me of the Don Jr. and Eric Trump dynamic.
Okay.
So to where one of them was very dim-witted, being Eric Trump and Greg Stink, and then Pete Twinkle was almost like the Don Jr., to where he wasn't judging the other person. He was almost just sort of like playing off of him and just correcting him, but like in a nice way, in like a friendly way, like in an I love you sort of way. So I think that this dynamic between like Jason and Will Forte is just like ripe for comedy. It's such a cool dynamic that I think we saw in Eric and Don Jr.
I agree with that because I don't think that, again, I don't know that this has been done really well before it. Like I think of like, Dan Aykroyd and Steve Martin. I think they're more even scene partners. I think Eddie and Joe, they're more even scene partners. And I'd even say like Mike Myers and Dana Carvey, like Wayne's World sketches, even though Dana plays it more dumb a little bit. I still think that like they're closer to even than what we get here between Jason and Will in this particular sketch. And I do think it set a template that is a really good point of what came after it. And I know it's something that like James Austin Johnson and Dismukes would like love to find. And maybe that's like the missing element is just being able to like be like one person in the duo has to like put the ego aside and play the dumb one in the duo to be able to pull this off.
Yeah, it's fine if there's like a power imbalance because that can be ripe for comedy. And so I think we saw that perfectly. It was that dynamic between Sudeikis and Will Forte with Pete Twinkle and Greg Stink. They did these, I think, 6 times, and all of them just hit. They're like home runs each time. Your girl, Kristen Wiig, we all love her. She's great. This is where she's like a great silent actor. I know I brought up that point in our Kristen Wiig episode, but this sketch right here is where Kristen Wiig's like a perfect silent actor. Just wonderful sketches all around. Everybody compliments each other so well.
Yeah, and that leads me to the other great Jason and Will sketch, which I don't know if you want to bring it up or you want me to do it, but we got to talk about John Bovey, of course.
Oh, yes.
Yes, the vision. Are you a John Bovey guy?
Yeah, I am. Speaking of setting a template, but yeah, no, these were great. So stupid that I was on board immediately.
All right, here we go. 2, 3, 4, 'cause I'm an Indian. On a cotton horse I do not ride, and I'm unwanted. Alive and dead. Alive and dead. Alive and dead.
Honestly, just like looking at a still picture of Will Forte's face as like the member of John Bovey is so hilarious with the mustache and the long hair. This is like pure joy. This is as good as it gets with like, just, the party of SNL and feeling like you're invited to like the greatest party in the world is like watching these two of your friends just like hang out and be so stupid and silly and just like sing these Bon Jovi songs as John Bovey, that they're all like the opposite band. And to me, every time it's popped up, I just like ate it right up.
Yeah, it got to the point where I associate the band and the artist Bon Jovi with this, where I have to remind myself that the actual real person's name isn't John Bovey.
Yes,
That's how closely I associate. I see John Bovey and I'm like, well, that's how it is, right? Oh, no. It's Bon Jovi. But you're right.
Well, also it's because like John Bon Jovi.
Yeah,
so
and then there's a whole like, you had layers to that. You're right. There's like two of our friends just being dumb. Like I could see just at a party and they're just like entertaining people and like, oh, these guys are so stupid. And you know the beats. Like you see them up there and you know what they're gonna do, but it's still like a fun surprise as to how they do it. And that takes a real performer to make you laugh, even though you know the beats. You see it coming from a mile away and you still laugh.
Yeah, and I see like people on like SNL Twitter like being like, bringing up Remember Lizards. This is like the Jason and the James Austin Johnson and Andrew Dismukes version of this sketch. And I'm like, you guys, you don't know how like good it is to have something like this. Like, I love that they did that, by the way. Like, I'm one of the ones who didn't mind that they did that. But like, to me, like this is the pinnacle of, just stupid. And it's so great to have that on Saturday Night Live. And I wish we got more of that, honestly.
Yeah, that was so good. And I realized, so we're about an hour in, and I don't know if JD's yelling at us right now, but I don't care, JD. This is a special episode for us. We're about an hour in, and we haven't talked about MacGruber at all. And this is maybe the thing he's most known for. This spawned what I think is a hilarious movie, and we have not talked about. Yeah, and he did it 9 times. And of course, he did it 27 times, probably essentially, because they were all 3-part runners, basically. And yeah, what do you think of MacGruber, John?
Yeah, first of all, JD, this is our playground. Like, let us do our thing here. We're cooking. But I love MacGruber. MacGruber was the thing that, like, when MacGruber would come on and we were watching the show live in high school, there would be audible cheers in the room. Like sometimes, like I talk sometimes about like my SNL history, and like we would be like my friends and I loved Saturday Night Live so much that we would be, this is like before we were old enough to like go out to clubs and like drink. We would like have house parties with our friends, and we'd have like a lot of people in our high school grade over, and SNL would be on the TV in the living room, and like I'd always be like somewhere nearby so I could like see what was happening and not feel like the FOMO of not having watched it and as it's happening. So like 2 things would happen during this era that would just like make the house shake. 1, SNL digital short pops up. Number 2 was MacGruber theme song comes on. And people would be like, everyone would sing like MacGruber, like as that would come on. And it was just like, nobody, like we were young, like we didn't like get the whole like MacGyver, like the whole thing. Like we didn't get it. But like knowing what I know now, it's just like a brilliant portrayal of like this characterization. And obviously we're going to get like at one point the real MacGyver. I mean, there's so many good variations of this, including like Betty White and everybody. But yeah, this is like his most well-known character. And it only took us an hour to get here because there's so many other brilliant things on his resume, but it doesn't take away from the fact that these sketches, or like blackout jokes, really, because this is like the pinnacle of a blackout, joke on SNL, are amazing. They're amazing. And it's like really the last real runner we've ever had at the show.
Damn, this door is locked from the outside. As soon as that liquid hydrogen's released, this baby's gonna blow sky high. What's the plan, MacGruber?
I want to kiss you on the mouth.
What? 10 seconds.
Okay, quickly. April, hand me the guitar. Give me the guitar. Come on. Okay, check this out. MacGruber, I got 10 inches of loving, and I want to give it to you.
Are you drunk?
MacGruber. Okay, maybe it's not 10, but it's certainly 7.
Come on, man, do something.
MacGruber, okay, it's more like 5 or maybe 4. MacGruber.
You alluded to something when you mentioned, he did one with Betty White, or Richard Dean Anderson, the real MacGyver, Charles Barkley. Something really important about recurring characters, and this one didn't fall into that trap, is diminishing returns. And that's a really huge topic amongst SNL fans. Lisa from Temecula recently has been, we've talked about the concept of diminishing returns possibly as far as that goes. MacGruber didn't suffer from that. I don't think there was diminishing returns in these that I could remember. It seemed like all of them basically hit.
I mean, yeah, you're talking to the wrong person if you don't if you want to argue with me that they didn't, because I think that like these to me were so hilarious, and I think that it was a great level of escalation, and I really feel like the formatting of these is like one of the last great things about traditional television, which was like, we talk a lot now on the SNN about, you know, what are the producers at SNL like really thinking about when they produce a new season of Saturday Night Live, like all the way now in the 2020s. And like, is the show being produced for somebody to watch it every Saturday night at 11:30 to 1 a.m.? Or is it being produced in smaller doses for people to watch on TikTok and YouTube? And I think that you can't produce these sketches in the new format of the show potentially, because then you have to put them back to back in like a YouTube video, which is often what they did.
Right.
And I think that takes away a little bit from the MacGruber sketches, which was the having to wait to see what's going to happen later on in the episode made these sketches even better. Like you would have to go like 25 minutes before you saw the next MacGruber, or if it like, is there going to be another one? Like what's the next escalation here? And I just love like the playing with the format in modern times that they were able to do with these sketches.
That's a great point that I never thought of, but you're absolutely right. Like kids these days, am I right? Instant gratification and whatnot. Like, yeah, they don't,
they don't get it.
Yeah, they don't. They just don't get
So
it. No, that's such a good point though, and I want to see. Yeah, as SNL fans, we have like these lists that we want to see this and that, and I'm with you on runners. Like I love runners. Like there's another example, like the closet organizer. Like,
oh man,
yeah,
so
with John Hamm, like in John Hamm's episode, like that was that's an unexpected runner too, and that was a different kind of runner with the closet organizer. But yeah,
I mean that is something that like I feel like they would never do now, but and they wouldn't even like really do that in 2010. Like that was so unique that they allowed Will Forte to do something like that, where like he appears as the closet organizer in the John Hamm episode, and then like in a different sketch later in the night, like he meets the guy from the closet organizer at a bar, and like that's something that they would do in like the late 80s, maybe not in 2010. But I think that Lorne at the time probably was like, we're going to give this to Will because like it's so brilliant.
Yeah. From John Hamm, that was a great episode. We covered John Hamm in the SNL Hall of Fame, but yeah, that was like another little brilliant piece of physical acting, especially that Will Forte did. Before we kind of start heading to the home stretch and closing this out, we can do like a little lightning round, unless you have something else before the lightning round.
No, we'll do the lightning round, but I was going to say, JD, I'm keeping Thomas here forever because we're just going to keep going and going on Will Forte.
I'm excited. I'm pumped. Yes. Yeah. So I want to do like a little lightning round. If you have like one or two sketches that people should just go check out, I have a couple. If you have a couple, we'll start with you and just kind of briefly, like just maybe one or two more sketches that people should check out if they want to know Will Forte.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, one of my favorite sketches from his era at the show was a sketch that involved like most of the cast. And it was a series of sketches where there would be a toast at like a wedding or a funeral or something like that. And you get all these characters from different cast members who would show up there and they would recur. We did see this a little bit in a recent era, but it wasn't as to the brilliance of like what these cast members would do. And it involved Will Forte playing a character named Hamilton, who's this like super far right guy who like comes up the microphone and whispers about how like Obama shouldn't be president and like he's like the devil and like all these things. And it's like, it's so weird in retrospect because like we've seen in real life over the last like 10 years, like a lot of Hamiltons like pop up. But like at the time, I think like things weren't so serious. And like Will Forte could play this guy on the show. And he plays it like with this blonde wig looking so crazy with the glasses and everything like that. And to me, I laugh so much at this, especially one of the sketches where he admits that he's like in a relationship with Gabourey Sidibe.
Yeah.
It's so great. And I think Seth Meyers.
So would that be like Jan Krang, like A.D. Bryant's character, like that archetype of just somebody kind of speaking out in a public setting? I know Jan Krang was played bigger than Hamilton, but that's kind of where my mind went.
Yeah, see, those are more like catchphrase jokes to me, like the whole like Jan Krang, like that's like that. Whereas like this is all like in the world building that is brilliant about this character, which is like you only need like 30 seconds with the character to know everything about them. And like that is something that Will Forte does really well. And it's one of the characterizations of like I think some of the greats in SNL history. I know this is the lightning round, but I had to say like I love this sketch so much so that I think Seth Meyers had Will Forte do Hamilton at his wedding.
Really?
Yes, and you could look up that clip online. I think he talked about that, and they showed a clip on late night of him doing it there and talking about why his wife should not be marrying him. And it is as good as it gets. Like you got to check
hilarious.
that out.
I'll go check that out. And you had another one?
Well, yeah, I was gonna say Clancy T. Baccarat. Okay. Like, I know we didn't bring it up. I don't know if I know these sketches aren't for everybody, but like him and Kristen Wiig just like screaming and yelling, singing Easter songs or whatever it is about spaceships, toddlers, Model T cars, and jars of beer. Those always crack me up. And again, he's in his like full like crazy hairdo, all that stuff. To me, you know, the two of them, we talked about him and Jason Sudeikis, but you know, him and Kristen Wiig, I think, are another brilliant team that I just wish we got a couple more years from. So another great sketch.
Yeah. Well, we had a whole episode of SNL where that was Will Forte and Kristen Wiig recently. So
that's true. I was one of the ones who didn't mind that as much.
Yeah, it was a weird episode. I won't dwell on his hosting gig too much, but it was very bizarre. But I did enjoy when they brought back the Clancy T. Baccarat character.
Yes. Yeah. So can I just say about that episode? Because I do think like it's interesting for some of the listeners who maybe weren't like following our coverage at the time of that, why that episode was so weird and unique was that like I was doing the stats on that episode like the day after, and I was like, that episode felt so weird, and I just like couldn't figure out why. And I love Will Forte, and then I realized that was the first episode since the second episode of the series where Paul Simon hosted the show, where no cast member was in more than 2 segments. Like I went through every episode, like all like 900 and something, and no regular cast member was in more than a couple of things. And like that was such a unique situation that it almost felt like a clip show, you know, in a way. Like It wasn't like a new episode of season 47 of SNL, and like nobody will catch me complaining about more Will Forte, but it was just a very unique episode that like people were excited to see how Will Forte was going to fit with this cast and what he was going to do. But it ended up being like a lot of MacGruber and like, you know, small sketches with a couple cast members. And I think like a lot of people had a night off.
Yeah. So whether you thought it was a good episode or a bad episode, it was definitely a memorable episode, very unique episode. So I'll give it that for sure. 2 that I wanted to shout out were he did about these 3 times. It was called First Night Out. So I think it was him and Kristen. He played this guy named Neil, and they would basically try to rope somebody in to do a 3-way with them. And just his delivery about calmly explaining how a sexual encounter will unfold between the 3 of them. Like, and then you show like they're meeting at the beginning of the night, and then they have more drinks, and they even show like the hand on the clock like move, like it's later in the night. And then they're going from talking about regular things to Will Forte's calmly explaining to them just in a matter-of-fact way about you're going to do this, and then I'll come in and do that. And just I found that just so like subtly bizarre. So I wanted to shout those out. Do you remember those? I'm sure you remember those, John.
Oh man, those are really great. There's so many good Will Forte things. I mean, it's hard to bring up everything, but yeah, those are really great sketches. And in particular, I think they did a very good one. I'm going to say it was with either Lindsay Lohan. I think they did one with Rainn Wilson.
Lindsay Lohan was in one, yeah.
Rainn Wilson also, I think they did a good one there. Steve Martin, I remember that one was a little bit weird.
Yeah.
But yeah, those are some good ones.
Yeah, and then there's a one-off. So I talked about how I love his one-offs. And there was one he did with Drew Barrymore and Kristen Wiig called Poison Therapy in season 32. And Will's character, he and his wife are in marriage counseling, and Kristen Wiig plays the marriage counselor, and he's married to Drew Barrymore. And they're talking just in this matter-of-fact way about how Drew Barrymore likes to poison him, and Will Forte almost plays it so small and subtle and so funny. He's almost like excusing his wife for poisoning him, and Kristen's really playing it well too, and she's saying, as a matter of fact, like, so why do you think that is? And then Drew Barrymore is like, well, I do poison him, so I understand why he feels that way. And then Will Forte's like, oh, you do? You understand? So he's all happy. So it's just this very great scene in a marriage counselor's office called Poison Therapy. Kristen Wiig, Will Forte, Drew Barrymore. I want to encourage people to go watch that one as well.
Yes. Oh, I got one more, by the way. Sorry,
Okay.
JD, but I gotta, we can't end this episode without bringing up Gilly. I mean,
yes.
Will Forte making those sketches as great as they are with his, Mr. Dillon. I think those sketches like lost their luster a little bit after he left the show.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, that is one of the better, characters within the world of Another Sketch.
Yeah, Will Forte's delivery lives on. Like when everybody thinks about those sketches, I think they're imagining Kristen dancing, but they're also thinking about Will's delivery with the Gilly. So that's a good pull, John. So post SNL, because I know, and especially when you look at cast members, you kind of like to look at post SNL, and we already covered his hosting stint. But after SNL, he started MacGruber, which came out around the same time as he finished the final season of SNL, like literally the same month, I think. He starred in The Last Man on Earth from 2015 to 2018, which is a show that I stand by. I always got some good laughs out of that show. He tends to pop up everywhere in TV and movies as well. He's one of those. He's almost like a Maya Rudolph in a way, where he's just like pops up in a lot of things. So have you enjoyed Will Forte's post SNL career? Like, what do you make of it?
Yeah, I also enjoyed him on 30 Rock. He had a run there as well. I think it's like Jenna's boyfriend. Look, anytime he pops up in anything, I love to watch it. Last Man on Earth, to me, was a great show that didn't get enough press. And when it got canceled, I was really upset about it because it had like a really good story about the end of the world. And then I ended up going to see Will Forte at Just for Laughs. And then he told us like how the show was intended to be finished. And I was like, if you know me, like I hate that stuff. Like I hate not knowing. So it like closed the book. So if anybody wants to know, like reach out. I'll let you know like how that was going to finish.
I'll definitely ask you when we hit stop here.
Yeah, I don't want to like root for anybody in case they don't want to. But I do know that how the show was going to end if they had a last season. So I mean, like I've really enjoyed everything I've seen him in. Anytime Will Forte does like an interview or something like that, I check it out. I sort of like knew that like coming off this career on the show, like I think that this was his playground, and there would not necessarily be outlets for his type of comedy out there unless he was going to produce his own show or have his own special or something like that. I think like the Tim Robinson format is maybe something we could have gotten from Will Forte at some point. If he had wanted to go that route, like if there wasn't Netflix that was paying for those types of things, I think that maybe that's something that we could have envisioned post his career. But I don't know. I mean, look, he's had an okay post career from SNL, but like I said, I think that SNL was his playground, and he was a master when he was on the field.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think he was destined to be like a character actor, kind of, and he plays that really well. He's always memorable in whatever he appears in. SNL, you're right, that was his playground, and he did it really well. So I agree with you. I think I've enjoyed his post SNL career, and I think he's doing what he was kind of destined to do. So now's the time. I don't know why you wouldn't vote Will Forte into the SNL Hall of Fame. I want to talk to somebody who, maybe on our upcoming roundtable, there might be one or two stragglers there. But so John, you want to give us a little pitch to end the show, why you think SNL Hall of Fame voters should consider casting a vote for Will Forte?
Yeah, I think he left his mark on the show that, everyone who's come since has always been compared to. People are always like looking for the next Will Forte. I don't think there's an easy comparison for anyone before him. So he lives in his own world in terms of the history of the show. I think he built things on the show in terms of, time within the show. That is the Will Forte area for people to go and play and be weird. And I think he changed the show. Like one of these things I like to think about or talk about when I'm voting for the Hall of Fame is if you pull this person out of the timeline, out of SNL history, is SNL the same? Is it better? Is it worse? And I think SNL is a much worse series without Will Forte in it for those 8 seasons, just being absolute crazy to the nth degree. So, if you listen to this whole show for an hour plus of Thomas and I just going on and on about how great he is, you'll know that there were just character after character, moment after moment in every one of his seasons that he just crushed. And I think that, going back and rewatching his career at the show, you are going to find yourself looking for a Will Forte moment in an episode that's going to brighten your day, and he's going to give it to you So he is absolutely made for the SNL Hall of Fame and deserves to be in there.
Made for the SNL Hall of Fame, Will Forte, an impassioned argument from our friend John Schneider, facilitated expertly by Thomas Senna. I got to tell you that I think he's a Hall of Famer. I don't think he's a first ballot Hall of Famer. He just doesn't have that gravitas. While I agree with John that the show would be very different, and it would be different in a negative way without him, I do think that he wasn't ever the fulcrum on which the show, pivoted. And that may hurt his case just a little bit. But you just heard 90 minutes from Thomas and John, and if that doesn't convince you, then I don't know what will. Maybe a sketch. Maybe we should go to a sketch right now. How do you like them apples? So let's go to a sketch called Trick or Treat. This appeared on an episode hosted by John Hamm. Let's go to it now.
Here is a Snickers for each of you. And for old time's sake, how about a Charleston Chew?
Thank you, Mr. Peterson.
Happy Halloween.
Trick or treat.
Can I help you?
Well, that depends. Do you have any Kit Kat bars? Heck, I'll take anything without toffee. It's a real bitch on the fillings. Hey, don't call me a bitch. You're the bitch. What? Seriously, though, trick or treat.
Aren't you a little old to be trick-or-treating?
Why, is 43 too old to be in the Halloween spirit? And by spirit, I don't mean ghost. Heck, I'm not that old. What? Look, I realize this is a little unusual, but, I just moved into the neighborhood, and, I figured I'd use trick-or-treating as an excuse to get out and make some new friends. I apologize for being so awkward.
No, that's quite all right. That wasn't very neighborly of me, and I apologize. Bob Peterson.
Jeff Montgomery. Pleasure to meet you.
This doesn't excuse my behavior, but I hope you'll accept a Reese's Peanut Butter Cup.
Bob, I couldn't think of a better welcoming gift. Thank you.
And just out of curiosity, what exactly is your Halloween costume?
I'm a sex offender.
Excuse me?
I'm a sex offender. For Halloween.
A sex offender?
Yes, pretty convincing, huh? Here, watch this. I'm Jeff Montgomery. By law, I'm required to inform you that I'm a repeat sex offender, and I'll be living in your neighborhood. It's a great costume, right? Could you sign and date these, please?
What am I signing?
Oh, you will get a big kick out of this. You see, as part of my costume, I'm having everyone sign this form acknowledging that there's a sex offender living in the neighborhood, etc., etc.
Let's just be clear on something here. Is sex offender your Halloween costume, or are you fulfilling a legal obligation to declare yourself a sex offender?
Bob, lighten up! It's Halloween! Besides, this is a tradition. I do this every time I move to a new town.
Are you, Jeff Montgomery, a sex offender?
Am I, Jeff Montgomery, a registered sex offender on Halloween? Yes.
What about not on Halloween?
Yes, even when it's not Halloween, I'm still Jeff Montgomery.
A sex offender.
Look, you're missing the point here, Bob. The point is Halloween spirit. The point is trick or treat. The point is, could you sign those papers?
All right, okay. Last chance, and I will check with the police on this. Do you have a criminal record?
Absolutely not. Look, if I am guilty of any crime, it's the crime of sexually assaulting 5 teenagers. Okay, now this is gonna sound like a terrible segue, but are you looking for a babysitter? Happy Halloween!
Oh, Jeff Montgomery in a sketch called Trick or Treat, registered sex offender. It's sort of a third rail. And the way Forte and company executed, they did it in a way that had a lot of comedic value. And I think that that just shows, it really showcases Forte's knack for taking the absurd and the awkward and milking the comedy out of them, where a lot of people might not see that comedy. So there's that. Hope you enjoyed yourself this week. I can't believe it, but we've only got 2 episodes left. Next week, we're going to be talking about Kate McKinnon, fresh on the ballot, and we will be talking to Ashley Bauer about Kate McKinnon and building the case for her inclusion in the SNL Hall of Fame. We'll follow that on May the 6th with the Don Pardo Award winner, and we're really excited to present that to you this year. That will be the same day that the ballots are distributed and voting is open. Voting will run until May 17th, and we will wrap up the whole season 5 on May 20th with an extravaganza, the likes of which you've never seen before. Now, if you would do me a favor, and on your way out, as you pass the Weekend Update exhibit, turn out the lights, because the SNL Hall of Fame is now closed.
Thanks for listening to the SNL Hall of Fame podcast. Make sure to rate, review, share, and subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. Follow us on social media at SNL HOF. This is Doug DeNance saying, see you next week.
To podcasts and such.